Of course, Razak doesn't just rely on sharp teeth and faster reflexes. The Ketharin hunter deployed technology that made Kepler Station's security systems look like children's toys. It started with his wrist-mounted scanner, a sleek band of dark metal that glowed with soft, shifting colors. It didn't just track Morrison's location. It read his biosignatures in real time: heart rate, respiratory levels, neurochemical spikes. It measured his psychological stress like a doctor taking a temperature, quantifying his fear, his adrenaline spikes, his flickers of hope. Razak monitored it all with detached interest, a gourmet checking the doneness of his meal. Then came the drones. They unfolded from his armor like metallic petals, 6 of them, each no larger than a human hand. They hummed to life with a sound that was more vibration than noise, a frequency that set teeth on edge. A 3-dimensional drone net, predictive targeting online, multispectral analysis engaged. This wasn't just hunting anymore. It was a technological sweep designed to eliminate the very concept of hiding. The drones fanned out, their sensors painting the corridor in layers of data Razak could see through his retinal display. They mapped heat signatures, distinguishing the warm glow of Morrison's body from the cooler background of the station's hull. They tracked the micro-vibrations of his footsteps through the deck plates. They even analyzed the residual energy signatures of equipment Morrison had touched minutes before, tracing his path like a bloodhound following a scent. The air shimmered with their activity, a silent, deadly net closing in. This was a system designed for efficiency, for a clean, clinical end to the chase. No messy confrontations, just a target located, isolated, and terminated. Razak's voice echoed down the corridor, calm and conversational, a teacher lecturing a slow student. Most prey species follow predictable patterns, he said, the drones relaying his words from all around Morrison. They either fight with futile, desperate strength or they hide in pathetic, obvious places. They succumb to their base instincts. It is efficient. His tone held no malice, just the cool assessment of a professional evaluating a process. Then he paused, and for the first time a note of something like genuine curiosity entered his voice. But humans. You are a fascinating statistical outlier. You run. You consistently choose flight long after the data suggests your chance of escape has dropped below 0.01%. You expend enormous energy reserves on a strategy with a proven failure rate. You just keep running. He wasn't complimenting them. He was noting a baffling inefficiency in their behavioral algorithm, a glitch in the universal food chain. Every piece of tech Razak unveiled, every boast about his superior hunting systems, was a gift to Morrison. The scanner told him his act was working. His spiking fear readings were selling the performance. The drones showed him their capabilities, their blind spots. Their reliance on predictive targeting meant they worked on probabilities, on anticipated movements. They expected prey to behave like prey. They didn't anticipate an engineer who knew every overloaded power conduit, every unstable plasma relay, every maintenance hatch that didn't show up on the official schematics. Razak saw a quarry being tracked. Morrison saw an opponent showing him his entire hand. Each new technological marvel was another variable in the equation Morrison was building in his head. The hunter's toolkit was impressive, overwhelming, designed for a clean kill in open terrain, but it was utterly unprepared for a fight in a labyrinth built and maintained by the prey itself. Which brings us to how a maintenance man turns a station into a weapon. You know, a station like Kepler isn't just a habitat. It's a city of hidden passages and forgotten junctions. A maze of service tunnels, crawl spaces, and power conduits that don't show up on any official schematics. The main corridors, the wide, polished hallways where people stroll to the mess hall or the observation deck, those are just the public face. The real station, the working guts of the place, exists in the narrow, dimly lit spaces behind the walls, and Morrison knew every inch of it. His decades of experience gave him an intimate map of the station's skeleton that nobody else possessed, not even the station commander. He knew which access panel near Hydroponic Sector C was slightly warped and required a specific twist to open quietly. He knew that the power conduit running behind the main comms array had a faulty regulator that caused a localized EM field, just strong enough to scramble short-range sensors for a half-second every 11 minutes. This wasn't data you found in a manual. This was knowledge earned with grease-stained hands and late-night repairs. The tension was a live wire. The main corridors were death traps under the drone net's constant silent surveillance. But the maintenance tunnels were a different story. They were Morrison's domain. He slipped into one through a panel hidden behind a stack of crates marked spare filtration units. The door hissed shut behind him, plunging him into the familiar warm darkness filled with the hum of machinery and the smell of ozone and warm metal. To Razak, watching his biosignatures and drone feeds, it must have looked like his prey had briefly vanished into a sensor shadow, a minor glitch in the system. He wouldn't know it was a calculated move into a territory the hunter could not properly map. Morrison moved like a ghost through this metal skeleton. He used narrow passages known only to his maintenance team, routes that bypassed whole sectors of the station. He didn't just run, he flowed. His hands, without looking, found the rungs of ladders, the edges of catwalks, the valves that needed an extra turn to prevent a telltale squeak. He was a part of the station's infrastructure, another component in the machine. He needed to maintain the illusion, though. The performance of the wounded animal had to continue. He took a sharp edge of a loose conduit and pressed it hard into the palm of his hand, hissing at the real, bright pain. A few drops of blood, smeared strategically on a handhold, then a few more further down the passage. A convincing trail for a hunter who would expect it. A calculated sacrifice to sell the story of a creature growing weaker, more desperate. His path wasn't random. He deliberately led Razak, and more importantly the drone net, into sectors where the infrastructure was its most fragile. He navigated toward the old power grid in Sector Gamma, which had a habit of overloading and causing localized brownouts. He moved through the environmental control zones that were flagged for maintenance, their regulators unstable and prone to creating brief, intense pressure differentials that played havoc with acoustics and air currents. Every hiccup in the drone network was a chance he created. Every flicker of the low-powered work lights in the tunnels was a software anomaly he'd engineered by overloading a specific junction box 3 corridors back. The hunter's sophisticated tech, so powerful in a void or on an open plane, was suddenly trying to track a target through an environment that was actively, subtly hostile to its sensors. The hunter relied on his flawless, predictable technology. The engineer relied on his deep, intimate, and slightly broken home field advantage. He stayed one step ahead, not by being faster, but by knowing the road better. He anticipated the drone net's predictive patterns and led it into areas where its predictions would fail, where the station itself would feed it bad data. He used the environment as a shield, a cloak, and a weapon. That was the moment the hunting ground fundamentally shifted in favor of the prey. The chase was no longer on Razak's terms. It was on Morrison's. The wolf wasn't just chasing the pig. He was chasing it through the brick house, and the pig knew where all the traps were buried in the walls. So where do you lead a galaxy-spanning predator for a final confrontation? You don't choose a wide-open space where his speed and tech dominate. You don't pick a dead-end corridor where he can corner you. You lead him someplace loud, someplace chaotic, someplace where the environment itself becomes your ally. Morrison's winding path through the station's underbelly wasn't random panic. It was a deliberate, calculated route with one destination: the mining bay. This sector housed the station's most dangerous and powerful machinery, the industrial heart that kept Kepler running. It was a cavernous space bigger than some planetary hangars, filled with colossal excavator arms that could crush a ship, grinding processors that chewed through solid rock, and refining arrays that glowed with contained thermal fury. The air hummed with a deep subsonic vibration you felt in your teeth more than heard with your ears. It was a labyrinth of shadows cast by massive machinery and piercing emergency lights, all drowned out by a constant, deafening roar, the sound of industry working at full capacity. It was, in other words, the perfect place to mask movement and disrupt sensitive alien technology. The acoustic chaos would render Razak's audio targeting useless. The sheer mass of machinery and the complex energy signatures from the processors would create a sensor soup, blinding his drone net's predictive algorithms. The hunter's advanced toolkit, so effective in the clean, quiet corridors, was about to get a crash course in heavy industrial interference. Razak followed, his confidence utterly unshaken. From his perspective, his prey had fled into an industrial dead end. The mining bay had one main entrance, the massive iris door Morrison had just slipped through, and no other exits large enough for a person. To the Kitharan, this wasn't a trap. It was a conclusion. He stepped onto the main excavation platform, a wide, flat expanse of reinforced metal used for calibrating the larger equipment. He believed he was cornering a terrified engineer in the one place with nowhere left to run. He could sense the end of the chase, the victory he had been promised. Morrison, watching from a high gantry shrouded in steam from a coolant leak, allowed himself a thin, hard smile. He keyed his comm, a local hardwired channel the drones couldn't intercept. His voice was calm, devoid of the earlier panic, just a dry observation thrown into the roaring din. "Bet your hunting manual didn't cover this one," he muttered. He wasn't talking to Razak. He was just stating a fact, and he was right. The hunter's manual, a comprehensive database of thousands of prey species, would detail behavior in natural settings, forests, deserts, jungles. It would catalog responses to open pursuit, to ambush predation, to territorial defense. It was a text written for a universe of tooth and claw, of natural selection and biological adaptation. It had no chapter on prey species that would lead a hunter into an artificial canyon of deafening machinery and contained stellar energies. It had no data on an organism that would use its own industrial infrastructure as a weapon. This was a human trick. Unprecedented. Illogical. Morrison pivoted instantly from evasion to offense. The running was over. The performance was done. Now he was working. The mining bay's layout wasn't a cage for him. It was the foundation of his trap. He moved along the gantry, his fingers tracing the familiar console of a primary power relay station, his eyes fixed on the figure standing confidently on the platform below. Meanwhile, the Predator stood centered on the wide metal stage, his sensors struggling to filter the overwhelming input. He scanned the shadows, the moving machinery, the clouds of vented gas, believing he was moments from a clean kill. He sensed victory. He just failed to recognize what that victory would cost him. He was standing exactly where Morrison needed him to be. I mean, what's the one thing on a mining station that can vaporize a predator? It's not a plasma rifle. It's not some hidden military-grade weapon. It's the station's reason for existing. Morrison threw open a maintenance panel on the gantry, his fingers flying across a custom interface he'd wired himself years ago. The station's official logs would tell you they crack asteroids with advanced kinetic drills. That's the public story, the safe story for the corporate brochures. The reality was far more efficient and far more terrifying. The station didn't use drill bits. To break apart planetoids rich with minerals, they used controlled antimatter charges, not explosives, not energy weapons, the pure fundamental opposite of matter itself, contained in magnetic bottles and directed with pinpoint accuracy. This wasn't just powerful. This was planet-cracking technology. The kind of force you use to rearrange solar systems, shrunk down and packed into a delivery system for precision mining work. It was the heart of a star, bottled and aimed. And Razak, for all his advanced hunting tech, his biosensors and his predictive drone net, was standing directly on the excavation platform, the business end of that system. He wasn't just standing on a metal stage. He was standing on a platform powered by contained supernovas. His technology was built to track life, to analyze biology, to predict the movement of flesh and blood. It had no protocols for this. It couldn't compute the energy signature building beneath his feet because, on a fundamental level, that energy wasn't supposed to exist in a contained, weaponized form. It was a force of creation, not destruction. Morrison's entire plan hinged on a single desperate maneuver, redirecting the main power feed. The station's reactors channeled immense energy to the containment fields that kept the antimatter from touching, well, anything. His idea was brutally simple. Overload the system. Send a massive, uncontrolled surge of power directly to the magnetic constrictors lining the platform. He wasn't trying to fire a weapon. He was trying to force a catastrophic systems failure exactly where Razak was standing. It was a move that could breach containment. If the magnetic fields faltered even for a microsecond, the antimatter would contact the normal matter of the platform, the air, Razak himself. The resulting annihilation would release energy on a scale that could vaporize the entire mining bay and potentially rupture the station's hull. It was the definition of a last resort, a gamble that risked everything. But Morrison's engineer's mind had already done the math. He wasn't acting on desperation. He was executing a calculation. He knew the tolerance of the containment field generators down to the kilojoule. He'd personally replaced the superconducting coils in the main relay 6 months ago. He knew their peak load capacity before they'd fail. He'd calculated the energy flow, the surge duration, the precise moment the field would become unstable but not yet collapse. He wasn't planning a full breach. He was planning a controlled flare, a momentary focused spike of raw creation energy, channeled into a space the size of a small room. The trap was set not with a knife or a gun, but with the most powerful weapon imaginable. The fundamental energy of existence itself turned into a scalpel. He input the final command sequence, his hand steady. The console screens flickered, lines of power distribution rerouting converging on a single point. The hum of the station around him deepened, shifting in pitch, becoming something more visceral, more hungry. Which brings us to the final, irreversible action. Morrison's finger hovered over the execute command. There would be no warning siren for this, no countdown. Just the silent digital commit of a command that would either save his children or tear a hole in the side of his home. He took one last look down at the Predator standing oblivious on the platform, then pressed the key. Of course, Razak's cybernetic reflexes are faster than any human's. His body is a weapon, engineered for instantaneous response, a fusion of perfect biology and seamless tech. The moment Morrison initiated the power redirect sequence, the containment field beneath the mining platform gave a low, deep pulse. It wasn't a sound you heard. It was a pressure wave you felt in your bones, a sudden gravitational sigh. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that tasted like ozone and nothingness. The drone net reacted first. Its predictive targeting algorithms, confused by the chaotic energy signatures of the bay, defaulted to a defensive protocol. The 6 drones stopped their wide search pattern and tightened into a close, buzzing orbit around Razak, forming a protective cage of whirring metal and scanning light. They were trying to shield him from an unseen threat, interpreting the energy surge as some kind of offensive weaponry being fired at them. They were looking for a projectile, an energy beam, a physical attack. They found nothing to intercept. Razak's own instincts, honed across 100 hunts, screamed a silent alarm. Every fiber of his being recognized imminent catastrophic danger. But his mind, so reliant on his technology's analysis, couldn't reconcile the feeling with the data. His wrist scanner flickered madly, its readings nonsensical. It was designed to track heartbeats and brainwaves, to analyze the pheromones of fear. It had no category for the raw building power of a controlled matter-antimatter reaction. The math was all wrong. The physics were dissonant to his entire frame of reference. His systems were telling him the environment was stable, even as his primal senses told him he was standing on the lip of a volcano. For the first time, the predatory confidence that had been his constant companion crumbled. His head jerked up, his glowing eyes scanning the gantries above, not with arrogance but with a dawning, horrifying confusion. The pieces clicked together with terrible, brutal clarity. The frantic run, the seemingly random path, the choice of this specific location. He saw it all not as the actions of prey, but as the deliberate maneuvers of a guide. He realized the frightened engineer wasn't running from him. He was leading him. The performance of fear wasn't a symptom of panic. It was the bait. The mining bay wasn't a corner to trap a desperate animal. It was a firing mechanism. The platform he stood on wasn't a stage for his victory. It was a target designator. The resolution played out in a handful of nanoseconds, each one stretched into an eternity of understanding. Razak experienced every microsecond of his colossal miscalculation. His cybernetics screamed at him to move, to leap, to evade, but there was nothing to evade. The attack wasn't coming from a direction. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, flowering from the very spot where he stood. His speed was meaningless. His technology was useless. His entire existence as a hunter was predicated on the idea that he could always outrun or outfight his prey. He was utterly unprepared for a fight where the battlefield itself was the weapon. The containment field glowed with an incandescent, painful white light, humming at a frequency that felt like it would shake the station apart. It held. Just for a critical moment, it contained the unimaginable energy building within it, focusing it, shaping it. It did not break. It directed. That was the moment the galaxy's most dangerous hunter met a force he couldn't outrun, couldn't outsmart, and couldn't even properly comprehend. He met a father's calculated rage, channeled through the heart of a star. You know what 40 tons of mining equipment and one surprised alien looks like vaporized? It looks like a brief, polite star deciding to pay your station a visit. Morrison's command triggered the sequence. The antimatter charge didn't explode so much as it simply allowed itself to exist in the same space as normal matter. The energy release was immediate and total, a conversion of mass into pure force on a scale designed to crack asteroids into gravel. It was power that could rearrange geography, and it was all focused into a space the size of a shuttlecraft. The containment field did its job, but just barely. It strained against the unimaginable pressure, the magnetic constrictors glowing with a painful incandescent white fury. They held the blast, not for minutes or seconds, but for a single critical microsecond. That was all the time the physics required. It was a blink so fast a supercomputer would miss it. But it was enough. It shaped the annihilation, directed it, kept it from simply swallowing the entire sector whole. It turned a universe-ending event into a precise surgical strike. Inside that bubble of focused energy, physics took a very short, very definitive coffee break. Everything. The reinforced excavation platform, Razak's sophisticated armor, his drone net, the very air he was breathing, was reduced to its component atoms. And then those atoms were introduced to their opposite numbers. There was no fire, no shockwave in the conventional sense. Just a silent, brilliant flash of light that left purple afterimages burned onto your retinas. One moment, there was a legendary hunter standing confidently on a platform. The next, there was a perfectly smooth, slightly glowing crater in the floor, and a lot of very confused sensor readings. Morrison, watching from behind a heavily shielded observation blister, remained unnervingly composed. He didn't flinch at the light. He didn't cheer. He just watched, his face a mask of professional assessment. He was an engineer reviewing the results of a high-stakes test. He saw the flash, noted the stable integrity of the bulkheads around the blast zone, and listened for the telltale shriek of a hull breach alarm that never came. His calculations had been correct. The containment held just long enough to do the job without killing them all. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It wasn't a sigh of relief, but more the sound of a complex task being completed. He surveyed the smoking, sterilized ruin through the thick viewport. The immediate breathing-down-your-neck threat to his children was gone. Erased. Not defeated in a fight. Not overpowered. Outthought. The predator, for all his strength and technology, had been defeated by engineering and a father's cunning. He was beaten by someone who understood the tools at hand better than the tool understood itself. Meanwhile, the station's central computer, which had been diligently monitoring atmospheric pressure and life signs, finally finished processing the data from the mining bay. The alarms, which were programmed for gradual pressure loss or reactor spikes, were utterly unprepared for an entire sector's worth of matter suddenly ceasing to exist. The system hiccuped, ran a diagnostic, then triggered every alert it had. Klaxons that had been silent during the actual life-or-death struggle now blared through the halls, finally announcing the obvious. The main mining bay, along with several billion credits worth of equipment, had just ceased to exist. The crisis was over. The paperwork, however, was just beginning. So what happens after you vaporize a diplomatic incident? The answer involves a lot of paperwork and people in very clean suits looking very concerned. First came the rescue teams, moving through the smoky silence of the mining bay with cautious, measured steps. They were followed almost immediately by corporate investigators and damage control units, their expressions a mix of professional detachment and pure, unadulterated shock. They fanned out across the scorched sector, scanning the perfect, smooth crater where the platform used to be, their instruments probably giving them readings that defied every safety manual ever written. The tension for Morrison shifted from survival to explanation. He had to sit in a stark white debriefing room and explain his unauthorized use of a planet-cracking antimatter charge inside the pressurized hull of a space station. He didn't talk about fear or fatherly instinct. He talked in engineering terms. He discussed power load capacity, magnetic constrictor tolerances, and calculated risk. He presented his actions not as a desperate gamble, but as the only available solution to an immediate and existential threat, using the tools he had on hand. He was an engineer filing a report on a complex repair job. Only the broken component had been a 7-foot-tall alien hunter. Commander Valdez, who had survived his own harrowing encounter with Razak, sat in on some of these meetings. He was left with a profound impression of what he later described as impossible human reflexes and sheer audacity. He'd seen soldiers freeze under less pressure. He'd seen trained specialists fail with more resources, He watched this maintenance engineer, still in his greasy overalls, calmly diagram the steps that led to turning a mining tool into a weapon of last resort, and he just shook his head. It was a level of cool-headed, creative thinking that wasn't in any fleet manual. The initial corporate narrative, predictably, focused on the massive property damage and the staggering loss of revenue. A main excavation platform, several drone units, a significant portion of the mining bay's primary systems, all gone. The bean counters back on Earth saw a balance sheet bleeding red ink and an insurance claim that would give their lawyers nightmares for years. They wanted someone's head on a platter, or at least a very large pay deduction. But the story of what really happened, and more importantly, why it happened, began to circulate among the crew. It didn't travel through official channels. It moved through the mess hall, the maintenance corridors, the rec rooms. It was the story of a dad who used every ounce of his knowledge to protect his kids. The corporate narrative of destruction kept bumping up against the human narrative of survival. And the human narrative was a lot more compelling. Krim, the xenobiology specialist, found his career taking a sharp and unexpected turn. He shifted his entire focus to human adaptive combat psychology. The Morrison incident, as it started to be quietly called, was a data goldmine. It wasn't about physical superiority. It was about psychological flexibility, ingenuity under pressure, and a stubborn refusal to accept a predetermined outcome. His research would eventually make him a leading expert on why humans are such frustratingly difficult prey. The official report, when it was finally filed, struggled for weeks to categorize the event. It couldn't be called a first contact incident because the contact was hostile. It wasn't a mutiny or an accident. They finally landed on classifying it as a defensive action, which was the only box that sort of fit, and listed the cause as an equipment malfunction during asteroid processing, which was, from a very specific and technical perspective, not entirely untrue. The resolution came in the form of a formal notice from corporate headquarters. Morrison received an official commendation for his exceptional problem-solving under pressure and his innovative use of available resources. It was a masterpiece of corporate language, praising him for saving lives while gently ignoring the several billion credits worth of equipment he'd turned into stardust to do it. There was no bonus, but there was also no court-martial. For a company that valued assets over people, it was a significant concession, which brings us to the long-term changes for Kepler Station. I mean, you don't let an alien hunter waltz in without upgrading your defenses. The corporate entity overseeing Kepler Station wasn't exactly heroic, but they were deeply, profoundly pragmatic. Their response to the incident wasn't motivated by outrage or a sudden concern for human life. It was driven by spreadsheets. They ran the numbers on what a full-scale breach by a hostile alien species would cost them, the lost revenue, the equipment damage, the potential complete loss of the station, and the figure was astronomically ugly. The financial liability of being vulnerable to interspecies predators became their number one problem to solve. So they solved it with money and metal. The station's entire defensive posture got a dramatic, no expense spared overhaul. New long-range sensor suites were installed, designed to detect the unique energy signatures of non-human vessels far earlier. The hull plating around key sectors, especially near airlocks, was reinforced with composite alloys that could supposedly resist a direct energy weapon blast. Security protocols were completely rewritten, moving from a simple identify and verify system to a layered, multi-factor authentication process that made getting into the station about as easy as breaking into a planetary treasury. And for the crew, the most immediate change was the paycheck. Hazard pay was increased across the board by a significant percentage. It was never officially stated why, of course. The memo just cited revised risk assessment protocols, but everyone knew. It was an unspoken, tangible acknowledgement of the new reality. The company wasn't paying them more to be heroes. They were paying them more to stay. It was a retention bonus for agreeing to work in a place that might suddenly become a hunting ground. Morrison's actions were quietly reframed in internal corporate communications. It wasn't just bravery. It was a proof of concept for human ingenuity under extreme duress. The bean counters and risk analysts looked at a maintenance engineer who turned a mining tool into a precision anti-predator weapon and saw a return on investment they hadn't accounted for. They realized that adaptive thinking under pressure, That stubborn, creative problem-solving was a strategic asset. It was something you couldn't buy, but you could certainly encourage and, more importantly, you could insure against. This shift in perspective changed the station's culture overnight. Maintenance engineers, once seen as the grease monkeys who kept the lights on, suddenly got a lot more respect. Their deep, intimate knowledge of the station's infrastructure, the shortcuts, the weak points, the hidden systems, was no longer just about fixing things. It was now seen as a critical defensive layer. Their daily walkthroughs and system checks were suddenly viewed as frontline security sweeps. A flickering light wasn't just a nuisance, it was a potential sensor blind spot. A strange hum in a power conduit wasn't just a repair ticket. It was a possible vulnerability. The station became harder, smarter, and infinitely more prepared because of one man's stand. The upgrades were physical, but the real change was psychological. The crew started thinking differently, looking at their environment not just as a workplace, but as a system that could be used, adapted, and if necessary, weaponized for survival. That was the moment corporate policy quietly, officially shifted to acknowledge the engineer as a first responder. Emergency protocols were updated to include engineering staff in security briefings. Their input on station layout and system redundancy was suddenly sought after in planning meetings. The guy with the wrench and the schematic was now recognized as being just as vital to station defense as the person with the plasma rifle. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes the best defense isn't a bigger gun, it's a better understanding of the terrain. Of course, word of Razak's failure doesn't stay confined to Kepler Station. You can't lose a hunter of his caliber, one of the Catherine clan's best, and keep it a secret. News travels fast in a connected galaxy, even if it travels quietly. The clans don't send out press releases. They don't issue public statements. The information just appears. It filters through shadow ports, merchant guilds, and military intelligence networks. A name gets crossed off a list. A mission status gets quietly updated from active pursuit to terminated asset lost. The whispers start. Something impossible happened out on the rim. The Kitharin hunting clans received the data packet. It wouldn't have contained a heartfelt eulogy. It was a tactical debrief, a cold, hard dump of Razak's final sensor logs, his bio readings, the last moments of drone footage before they winked out. They would have studied it with the detached focus of professionals analyzing a system failure. They weren't mourning a fallen comrade. They were dissecting a miscalculation. The data showed them a predator who followed a seemingly perfect profile of prey into a trap he never saw coming. An obscure addendum appears in the Interstellar Threat Catalog. It's not a headline. It's a footnote that changes everything. The species designation human gets a new, stark annotation. The threat assessment gets upgraded significantly. It's not just a caution. It's an extreme threat status warning with a specific, highlighted subclause, especially when protecting offspring. It's the kind of notation that makes military planners sigh and insurance underwriters demand triple premiums. It's the galaxy's way of putting a big red handle with care sticker on an entire species. The galaxy learned a hard lesson that day, one that gets passed around trading posts and officer clubs. It's about underestimating a species that looks primitive on paper. Humans don't have natural claws. They don't have venom or armored plating. Their reaction speeds are mediocre. Their physical strength is unremarkable. On a biological checklist, they shouldn't be a problem. The lesson is that the checklist is wrong. Humans aren't apex predators because they're the strongest. They're apex predators because they're the most creative and, when cornered, the most vindictive. They will use the environment. They will use tools. They will use their own fear as a weapon. They are remarkably, stubbornly unwilling to quit when their family is on the line. Razak thought he found easy prey. He saw a maintenance engineer in greasy overalls. He saw a physiological profile that screamed, "Flee and hide." He saw a species that ran. What he actually found was a father who knew every bolt, every circuit, every hidden passage of his world. He found someone who could turn a wrench, a power grid, and a container of raw stellar fury into a solution. He didn't just underestimate a man. He underestimated an engineer in his own workshop. The encounter becomes a quiet, potent cautionary tale, the kind hunters tell each other over drinks. It's not a story of glorious battle. It's a story of a hunt that went sideways because the prey refused to follow the script. It serves as a stark deterrent. The reputation spreads hunting humans isn't sport. It's a high-risk venture with a catastrophic failure mode. They might look like easy prey, but they fight with the one weapon you can't profile, a problem-solving brain with something irreplaceable to protect. This perception becomes a form of defense in itself, a shield built from rumor and aftermath. Meanwhile, back on Kepler Station, life begins to return to a new normal. The scorched plating in the mining bay gets replaced. The air loses the faint scent of ozone and superheated metal. The crew walks a little taller with a new, quiet confidence humming under the routine. They've seen what one of their own can do. They know the station's hidden strengths. The incident fades from a daily terror into a shared story, a foundational piece of the station's identity. The corporate upgrades hum in the background. The increased hazard pay hits their accounts, and the day-to-day work of keeping a city in space running continues. But the universe outside has shifted, just a little, and Kepler Station sits at the center of that shift, getting on with the business of living. You know how kids process these things? My dad's job is cooler than yours. For Morrison's daughter Emma, the whole terrifying encounter with an alien hunter didn't become a source of nightmares. It became a point of pride, the best story on the playground. While corporate investigators were still picking through the scorched remains of the mining bay and arguing about liability waivers, Emma was trying to figure out how to describe what her dad did for show and tell. The tension for her wasn't about fear or reliving the event. It was about the struggle to explain. Maintenance engineer doesn't sound very exciting when your classmate's dad is a starship captain or a deep space geologist. It sounds like the guy who fixes the toilets. She'd try to elaborate, talking about power conduits and atmospheric processors, and she'd just get blank stares. How do you explain that your father's understanding of a faulty oxygen recycler is what saved everyone? It's a hard sell to 8-year-olds, but after the incident, something shifted. She didn't see a man who almost died. She saw a hero who won. She stopped trying to use the old title. She crafted a new one, a combination of all the coolest jobs she could imagine. She'd stand up in class, chest puffed out with pure, unshakable conviction, and proudly proclaim, "My dad is an alien fighting space engineer." It was a title that bypassed all the boring details and went straight to the heart of the matter. It was, from a certain point of view, entirely accurate. Her school report was a masterpiece of childlike admiration. It glowed with a simplicity that cut through all the complex, galaxy-spanning implications of the event. It wasn't about antimatter containment fields or strategic luring techniques. It was about a dad who was clever and brave. She drew pictures of her father standing tall against a big, scary monster, holding a giant wrench that gleamed under the station lights. She wrote about how he knew all the secret passages and used them to keep her and her brother safe. She turned a corporate crisis into a bedtime story with a happy ending. It was the simple human payoff to a conflict that had rewritten interstellar threat databases. The cosmic lesson about humanity's resilience, our stubborn ingenuity, our protective ferocity, was embodied not in a military report or a scientific paper, but in a child's boast to her friends. The victory was cemented not in the official commendations or the upgraded security systems, but in the absolute safety and unshakable pride of his children. They went to sleep at night knowing their dad was the guy who could outsmart anything. That was the trophy. That was the real win. Meanwhile, life moved on. The corporate memos got filed, the new sensors got installed, and the hazard pay got deposited. But in the Morrison household, the lasting change was quieter. It was in the way Emma would sometimes look at her father, not just with love, but with a new kind of awe. It was in the knowledge that the scare was over and they were all still here together. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, solid confidence. The universe had thrown its worst at them, and their dad had turned it into a story they could tell with a smile. Which brings us to the real trophy Morrison won. It wasn't hanging on a wall or listed in a bank statement. It was in the eyes of his kid, telling her classmates that her dad had the coolest job in the whole galaxy. So does Jake Morrison become a hardened killer after this? The answer is simpler and quieter than you might expect. He just goes back to work. He returns to his life, his job, his kids, and his one small, illicit rebellion against a strict station pet policy. A ginger tabby cat named Mr. Whiskers. The man who rerouted antimatter to vaporize a threat is the same man who now has to fix a leaky hydraulic line in the cargo bay. There's no dramatic shift, no darkening of his personality. The experience is a thing that happened, not a thing that changed who he is at the core. The tension between who he was forced to be and who he truly is lingers, But it's a subtle undercurrent, not a raging river. He was compelled to become something he's not, a hunter, a killer, to protect the only thing he truly loves. He used his intimate, hard-earned knowledge of the station's inner workings, knowledge meant for building and maintaining, and he turned it toward a single, brutal act of destruction. He leveraged every skill he had as an engineer, every trick of the trade to orchestrate a perfect lethal trap. He thought in terms of power loads and structural tolerances while planning an annihilation. But the suit of the apex predator never really fit. It was a costume he put on for a specific, terrible performance. He remains at his heart a maintenance man and a father. His identity is tied to fixing broken things and raising good kids, not to hunting or fighting. The transformation was a temporary role, a part he was forced to play by a circumstance so extreme it defied all the normal rules. He stepped into that darkness because the light he was protecting was worth any cost. The experience, of course, leaves its mark. You can't do what he did and just shrug it off. It's there in the way he sometimes pauses for a half-second longer before cycling an airlock, or the way his eyes might track a flicker on a sensor screen that everyone else ignores. It's a new layer of vigilance, a quiet awareness of how fragile normalcy can be. But these are scars, not defining features. The event doesn't become his entire story. It becomes a chapter, a dark one, in a much longer book that is still mostly about repair schedules and school projects, and a cat that isn't technically supposed to exist. The resolution isn't about embracing his newfound power. It's about putting it back on the shelf and hoping it gathers dust. He remains a reluctant apex predator, a man who now knows with absolute certainty what he is capable of, but one who hopes with every fiber of his being that he is never, ever forced to be that person again. He doesn't take pride in the act. He takes solace in the result: his children are safe. The act itself is just the grim, necessary math that made that result possible. That was the moment he proved a fundamental truth about strength. It isn't an identity. It isn't who you are. It's a tool. It's a wrench you pick up when the pipes are bursting. Or in this case, when a monster is at the door, you use it to solve a problem and then you put it down. You don't carry it with you, showing it off. You go back to your life. His strength wasn't in wanting to fight. It was in his ability to, when left with no other option, win. And then crucially, to go back to being the guy who fixes the pipes. The real victory was in the putting down of the tool, not in the wielding of it. He walked away from the hunting ground and back to his workshop, and that was the point all along. I mean, the Three Little Pig fable isn't about building the strongest house. It's about building the smartest one. Morrison's quiet reference to that old story during his run through the station corridors wasn't just a random thought. It was the guiding philosophy of the entire encounter, the core truth that shaped every decision he made. It crystallized the fundamental difference between how he saw the world and how Razak saw it. One saw a hunt. The other saw an engineering problem with very high stakes. The tension in the fable comes from the clash of methods. Brute force, the wolf's only tool, works perfectly against the flimsy houses of straw and sticks. He huffs and puffs and they blow down. Easy, clean, efficient, but it fails completely against the house of bricks. The wolf can huff until he's blue in the face, but the structure holds. The story isn't about the wolf's strength. It's about the pig's preparation. Strength meets a stronger defense and strength loses. Razak was the wolf in this scenario through and through. He arrived on Kepler Station expecting to huff and puff and blow the house down. He had the strength, the speed, the technology. His entire approach was predicated on overwhelming force and psychological domination. He expected a straightforward hunt against a panicked, inferior species. He saw Morrison's running as confirmation of his superiority, the predictable flight of prey that knows it's doomed. He never considered that the running might be part of the construction process, but Morrison's house wasn't built with bricks and mortar. It was built with knowledge, preparation, and a specific human kind of cleverness. His defense wasn't a barrier to be broken. It was a system to be exploited. He didn't try to meet Razak's strength with strength. That would have been suicide. Instead, he met it with a fundamentally different kind of power. He used the predator's own arrogance, his reliance on technology, and his fixed expectations against him. He didn't build a wall. He built a trap disguised as a corner. The galaxy is absolutely full of predators who are stronger, faster, and equipped with better technology. That's just a fact of interstellar life. If humanity tried to compete on those terms, we'd lose every time. Our edge has never been physical superiority. It's always been the stubborn, creative, endlessly adaptable problem-solving mind. It's the ability to look at a mining laser and see an anti-personnel weapon. It's the willingness to use fear as a tool and a station's infrastructure as a chessboard. It's the refusal to accept a predetermined outcome, especially when family is involved. The resolution of both stories, the fable and the event on Kepler, proves the same point conclusively. The smart pig, the one who prepared for the wolf's specific brand of violence, is the one who survives, the one who thought ahead, who understood his opponent's methods and who built his defense accordingly. Morrison didn't win because he was a better fighter. He won because he was a better planner. He outthought the problem. Meanwhile, the wolves of the galaxy are quietly, urgently rewriting their threat assessments. The Kytherin clans and every other predatory species with access to the report are adding new footnotes, new caveats, new warning labels to the human designation. They're learning that the profile is deceptive, that the flight response isn't always panic. Sometimes it's the first step in a very long, very clever strategy. They're discovering that the house that looks weak might just be made of something much stronger than bricks. It might be made of pure, unassailable ingenuity. And that is a defense that no amount of huffing and puffing can ever break down. You know how after a crisis the mundane feels different? The ordinary tasks take on a new weight, a new texture. Jake Morrison goes back to fixing atmospheric recyclers and raising his kids. His hands are back in the machinery. His mind focused on calibrating pressure valves and patching leaky conduits. His evenings are filled with helping with homework and listening to stories about playground adventures. On the surface, it's the same life. But underneath, everything has shifted. The routine is a conscious choice now, an act of rebuilding. Every unscheduled blip on a sensor, every flicker of a warning light that used to be just another line on a maintenance log, now carries a weight it didn't before. His heart doesn't exactly race, but it does a small, familiar clutch. His eyes track the alert for a half-second longer, his brain running a quick subconscious threat assessment before he dismisses it as a faulty relay or a power surge. The station's normal chorus of groans and hums now has a baseline of vigilance running underneath it, a silent counterpoint to the daily work. But the station is safer now. The corporate upgrades hum in the background, a constant, reassuring reminder that the universe has been acknowledged and defenses have been raised. His kids are prouder. He sees it in the way Emma looks at him, with a quiet awe that has replaced any lingering fear. They don't see a man who was scared. They see a dad who won, and he has proven to himself more than anyone what he's capable of. He faced the galaxy's best and didn't just survive. He engineered a solution. The fear is still there. It's a ghost in the machinery, a cold spot you sometimes feel when the environmental controls cycle. It's the memory of Razak's voice, the glow of his scanner, the silent pursuit. But it's joined now, and more importantly, outweighed by a hard-won confidence. It's the knowledge that when the systems failed, when the protocols were useless, he didn't. He looked at the problem and he fixed it. Permanently. He knows the station's secrets better than ever. His walkthroughs are different now. He doesn't just see a network of pipes and wires. He sees potential. He sees choke points and avenues of approach. He sees the weak points in the new corporate sensor grid, the blind spots a predator might use, and more importantly, he knows how to use them. His knowledge is no longer just for maintenance. It's for defense. It's a deeper, more intimate understanding of his home, earned in the worst way possible. Mr. Whiskers the cat remains illicit, a warm, purring secret in their quarters. The station's pet ban is still on the books, a pointless rule about allergens and sanitation, but Morrison keeps him. It's a small, quiet rebellion against a universe that just got a bit darker, a bit more dangerous. It's the insistence on a small, normal piece of life, a tiny act of defiance that says some rules are meant to be broken, especially when they get in the way of comfort. The cat is a piece of the old world, a touchstone of the before times, and he's staying. Life continues. The shadow of the hunter is gone, replaced by the steady, warm light of a protected family. The victory isn't in the continuation of some newfound conflict. It isn't in becoming a warrior. The victory is in the return to normalcy. It's in the simple, profound act of going back to work, of making dinner, of listening to a child read. It's in the reclaiming of the quiet, mundane life that was almost taken away. That was the point of the fight. Not to become a killer, but to remain a father, an engineer, a man with a slightly illegal cat. Which brings us to the final, lasting insight. The galaxy learned a lesson it won't forget. You don't mistake a human's home for a hunting ground. True strength isn't about being the predator. It's about being the protector. Corporate files now carry a quiet warning. This species is a bad bet when their young are involved. Remember, the most dangerous creature in the universe isn't the one with the biggest claws. It's a parent with everything to lose and a human brain clever enough to turn a mining station into a weapon. Underestimate that combination at your peril.